Back in the day, movie theaters were one of the first places you could spot when you first entered a town. They weren't plain multiplexes like you see today. These older theaters had a large illuminated vertical sign that announced the name of the cinema and a triangular marquee below that was lined with tiny blinking light bulbs. They were like a beacon that lured you inside. If you ever experienced one of these old theaters, then this video might bring back some fond memories. Long before movie theaters realized they could show 30 minutes worth of commercials before the movie started, we had something else to look at. The lush, heavy red velvet curtain covered the screen and made the auditorium majestic. People knew that they needed to be on their best behavior as they glanced up at this fancy curtain while listening to soft music. Most people spoke in hushed tones while waiting for the show to start. When the lights finally dimmed and the curtains parted, the audience fell silent in anticipation. Today, the screen is almost never blank. If the main feature isn't showing, then there is a constant slideshow of advertisements and trivia questions along with some loud pop music. At one time, theaters had uniformed ushers who would escort you to your seats. They were dressed like little toy soldiers, and they did a lot more than tear tickets and sweep up spilled popcorn. They made sure that no one was sneaking in the theater without paying, and they also helped make sure that no one was talking during the movie. These men and women were always willing to lend their elbows to help steady anyone coming down the aisle. One of the handy tools that they had with them was a flashlight, which allowed them to help latecomers into empty seats. Movie theater seats didn't come equipped with cup holders until the late 1960s, and even then, it was usually something that only newer theaters had. However, what every theater seat did have was a built-in ashtray. Yes, that's right. It's difficult to imagine now, but there was a time when smoking was allowed in theaters, and it was very common. You're most likely not going to see this in modern theaters thanks to fire regulations and secondhand smoke dangers. But if you're old enough, then I'm sure you can remember people puffing away in their seats. Before televisions became so common in every household, most Americans had to get their breaking news from the radio or newspaper. But neither one of those sources had a moving picture. That's where the newsreel came into play in theaters. These were commonly shown prior to the main feature. For most people, this was the only way that they could ever see some of the latest events that were happening. These newsreels could show anything from the Hindenburg explosion, Olympic Games, or film footage of war efforts. Back in the day, moviegoers could get a lot more bang for their buck. Actually, it was a lot more like 50 cents or less. Very rarely would a theater just show one single movie. After the newsreel, people expected to see a cartoon or two followed by a double feature. 2 movies for the price of one. The second film was usually one that wasn't quite as new or as prestigious as a main attraction. This is what most people called a B movie. Regardless, these double features were a nice entertainment value for many patrons. Today, this really isn't as common as it used to be, and when you do see it, it's often a special showing or celebration. A staple of the kiddie matinee was the chapter play or serial. These were filled with action and adventure and were often cowboys or space creatures. They were 20-minute shorts of continuing stories that ended each installment with a cliffhanger. These tempting little stories helped kids to get their chores done early so that they could spend their weekly allowance each Saturday. No one wanted to be the only kid on the playground who missed the latest adventure at the cinema. Going to the movies used to be a lot more of a formal event in the 1920s, 30s, and even up to the 1950s. Ladies and gentlemen dressed accordingly. Women wore dresses or smart suits, but never the house dress that they were wearing while they were washing dishes or vacuuming. Men wore suits and ties. Back then, no man or woman would ever leave the house without a hat which would complete their outfit. As fashions evolved, women's headwear went from big to huge and back to tastefully understated, while men usually wore a straw boater, the derby, or fedora. During those hat-wearing decades, blocking the field of vision of those sitting behind you was a very real problem. Most men always removed their hats and placed them in their laps during the film. Women, on the other hand, were much more reluctant to do so as it was a part of their fashion statement. Many hats on women were actually pinned on, and removal was seen as a hassle. Because of that, it became very common to see signs that stated, "Ladies, please remove your hats." In modern times, no one really dresses that fancy just to go see a movie. When theaters had double features and serials playing, it required quite a bit of planning and work. The projectionist needed time to change the reels, which resulted in 5 or 10 minutes of dead air. Theaters made the best of that downtime by rolling promotional reels to remind people of tasty snacks and drinks that were available at the concession stand. Many of the downtown theaters in big cities were often called movie palaces, and for good reason. They had elaborate architecture, and the decorations inside were also quite fancy. These cinemas were called atmospheric theaters because they were built and decorated with a theme which often featured a foreign location such as a Spanish courtyard or South Asian temple. Atmospheric theaters had lobbies that were several stories tall and featured one or more grand chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. It's no wonder why people felt compelled to dress up in order to go to the theater. Most theaters today aren't anywhere near as fancy. One other feature that these elaborate movie palaces had were cry rooms. A cry room was a soundproofed elevated room in the back of the theater with a large glass window in the front. These came in extremely handy for mothers who were trying to calm down a fussy baby. They could still enjoy the movie while listening to it over the public address system. Many of these rooms also came equipped with electric bottle warmers, complimentary formula, and a nurse on duty. It really would be great to see these cry rooms make a comeback. During the 1930s, America was smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression. Money was obviously very tight, and families had to be extremely cautious when it came to spending. A night at the movies was seen as an unnecessary luxury, and cinema audiences dwindled. Theater owners lowered their prices as much as they could, which sometimes was as low as 10 cents for an evening feature. But what really put people in the seats was Dishnite. Salem China and a few other manufacturers of finer dinnerware struck deals with theaters across the U.S., selling their theater owner their wares at wholesale. Then these products would be given away as premiums with each ticket sold. Soon housewives were demanding that their husbands take them out to the theater every week so they could get a coffee cup, saucer, gravy boat, or dinner plate to complete their place setting. One Seattle theater owner reported distributing 1,000 pieces of china, costing him $110 on a Monday night, and he took in $300. That was $250 more than he made the previous Monday. If you are one of the fortunate people who are lucky enough to live near a drive-in movie theater, then you will notice another change. At one time, these outdoor venues had poles sticking up out of the ground for every visitor. These held a speaker which could be removed and placed on the window for sound. For the most part, these have gone away. Now you can simply use your car stereo or another radio in order to tune into your movie and listen. If you do use your car, then you have to be careful not to drain your battery. Many of these drive-ins offer a jumper service because of that reason. In many ways, the movie experience at a drive-in has changed. Yes, the sound is better with your car stereo, but there are a lot more cars running in order to save the battery. If you want that old school sound experience, then an old portable radio will work just fine. Most cinemas today show movies in a digital format. In fact, Hollywood is no longer distributing major motion pictures in the film format. Because of that, there isn't much need for an intermission, and the projectionist has a much easier job. Very few movie theaters even have ushers. What that really means is that theaters have less people employed than they used to. Theaters tend to die out because they aren't the latest and greatest, and they are constantly evolving in order to stay in business. I hope you enjoyed this little video on some of the forgotten items from movie theaters. What were some of your special memories in the movie theater? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching.